Kamaru Usman vs. Belal Muhammad wouldn't be close.
I want to show the world that the Nigerian Nightmare is still here. The Nigerian Nightmare has always been the boogeyman of the welterweight division.
Belal Muhammad quickly tweeted, "See you soon." Is that something you would entertain if the UFC, came to you about it?
Who was it?
Belal Muhammad.
Who's that?
Former welterweight champion Belal Muhammad.
Next.
Belal, remember the name Muhammad.
We were on this podcast and Jaime Cejudo was like, how does it feel to be champion? And, you're at the top now. And I'm like, it feels good right now because everybody wants to listen to you. Everybody thinks you're the champ. Usman's like, I was a champ too. It's like, yeah, but you're not the champ anymore. He just couldn't let it go. He was like, anything you do, I do better than you. And then I was like, but you didn't take the head kick better than me. And I think that just triggered him where he was just like, I don't play these games, man. It's on sight when people talk like that.
Yeah, like I said, he became champion. He started to come at me with that energy. It was like, oh, you have a problem with me? Well, if you have a problem, I don't really do play the internet game. Let's talk it out.
Yeah, the history. We've been going back and forth. It's a clear number one contender fight. He's calling for the belt, 185, 170, but I'm number one. I'm still the guy at the top. So let's do it.
After Usman beat Joaquin Buckley in such a dominant fashion at UFC Atlanta, a lot of fans and a lot of pundits are floating the idea around of Usman's next opponent being Belal Muhammad, as both of these guys are former champions and both of them have had some beef in the past as well. But although Belal has had a lot of success in the UFC thus far, I'm here to tell you a potential matchup between these two wouldn't even be close. But quickly, before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm JuicyMMA. I make opinionative MMA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. But anyways, let's get into it. When you look throughout the career of Kamaru Usman, it's pretty clear that it's been one of the more successful ones in UFC history. As when you look early on in Usman's career, although he wasn't necessarily the most exciting guy, as he was essentially just a wrestler. He didn't have much striking, and even jiu-jitsu, he essentially had no jiu-jitsu whatsoever. But regardless of that, and regardless of the fact that he just had one main ability that he continuously went to, Usman was still being extremely successful, and he was still able to beat a lot of really impressive names at the welterweight division, as he was able to beat guys like Sean Strickland, Rafael dos Anjos, Damian Maia, and even Tyron Woodley for the belt, making Kamaru Usman the UFC champion. But once Usman became champion, things changed a little bit. Usman started training with head coach Trevor Wittman, and he was making significant improvements within his striking game. Of course, as I touched upon before, Usman was known as essentially just a wrestler, a guy who was going to take you down at a really high level, and once you were on the ground, you wouldn't be able to get back up. But ever since training with Trevor Wittman, Usman was starting to implement his striking ability. He had a really good ability to throw a jab and a right straight, and even at times he was also incorporating an ability to switch stances as well and throw southpaw jabs and southpaw left straights. And in some of his fights as UFC champion, we really saw Usman's striking game improve significantly. As his fight against Colby Covington, in both of their fights, Usman did a really nice job at utilizing that jab and that right straight, and he was able to finish Colby in the 5th round at the very end of the 5th round in their first fight, and he was able to beat Colby once again via decision in their second fight. But in that second fight, in the 2nd round, Usman was able to drop and almost finish Colby in that fight. But outside of his Covington fights, he was also able to finish Gilbert Burns with that southpaw jab. That was a huge weapon for him in that fight. And even in his fight against Jorge Masvidal, Usman was able to viciously KO Jorge Masvidal in that 2nd round. So at that point, after all those fights that I just mentioned and all those title defenses, Usman's game was really being taken to the next level. Of course, as I mentioned, he has elite wrestling, and he always had elite wrestling on his come up as well as when he was a UFC champion, but now he was also gaining the ability to finish other fighters, and that's really the next step for a lot of these dominant UFC champions. On their come up, they have a lot of decision victories, they have a lot of dominant decision victories, but once they become champion, they add another aspect to their game and they're able to finish guys. We see this a little bit with Merab Dvalishvili, as now it seems seems like he's starting to finish some fighters, and I think we saw that as well with Kamaru Usman to an even greater extent. But of course, after all the domination and of course after all the success, Usman then lost to Leon Edwards in the very last minute of the 5th round in that fight, lost again to Hamza Chimaev, although that was a really close fight, a weight class up against an extremely tough opponent, and of course his most recent fight was a win once again against Joaquin Buckley. And that's really where we stand at this point. But a question that some of you may be wondering at this point is, why do I think Kamaru Usman is going to dominate Belal Muhammad? Well, in my opinion, I feel this way for a couple different reasons, but the first reason I want to touch upon is the striking. Because when you talk about Kamaru Usman, as I touched upon before, he is just a jab and a right straight, and also has the ability to switch stances and throw a southpaw jab and a southpaw right straight. Obviously not very technical ability on the feet, or at least not very diverse ability on the feet, but Usman's able to get the job done on essentially everybody he goes up against. And I think when you talk about a guy like Belal Muhammad, who doesn't necessarily have the best striking defense, I think this is going to be a tailor-made matchup for Kamaru Usman. I think if Usman's able to land that jab consistently on Belal, it's going to start to pick up and start to have a lot of success as the fight goes on. And also similarly to what he's able to do to other guys, if he's able to land that right hand flush and clean on Belal Muhammad, I think we're going to be talking about an early night. Now, one thing I will say is in his fight against Joaquin Buckley, his striking didn't look good really whatsoever. He didn't look to strike at all. He threw a couple jabs, a couple right straights, but for the most part, Usman was just looking to wrestle. But I think there's a couple reasons for that, and I don't necessarily think it's because Usman's striking isn't good anymore. The reason why I think Usman was fighting like that is A, because he knew he had a huge advantage in the wrestling, as in rounds 1 through rounds 4, Usman was able to go for one takedown each round, get that takedown, and hold down Buckley for the entire round. So probably in his mind, he was like, why would I even bother striking with this guy with a potentially dangerous opponent on the feet when I have such a huge advantage on the ground? But the other reason for why I think Usman's striking didn't look that great is due to ring rust. Usman didn't fight for 2 years at that point, and I think he needed one fight just to get a little bit more acclimated to the UFC and a little bit more acclimated to fighting. And I think after this one fight, I think his striking is going to look a lot better in his next matchup, especially if it's against Belal Muhammad, who isn't really all that dangerous on the feet. But the next reason for why I think Kamaru Usman is going to dominate Belal Muhammad is due to his takedown defense. Because when you talk about Belal Muhammad, he does have skill on the feet. Yes, he does have an improved skill on the feet actually, as he did have some success against JDM in his last fight. But mostly what Belal wants to do out there is wrestle. But when you talk about a guy in Kamaru Usman that has all-time takedown defense, I don't think it's going to be very easy at all for Belal Muhammad to take down Kamaru Usman. I actually think this is going to be a mostly stand-up fight between the two. And if Belal is stuck on the feet with Usman, I don't think it's going to go very well, especially if this is a full 5-round fight. Because although skill for skill, I actually think Belal is probably the better striker, the danger difference between these two guys are immense. I think Belal could land 3, 4, 5, 6 shots in a row on Usman, and I don't think it's going to have much of an effect. But if Usman's able to land one jab, or one right straight, or one left straight even, I think he has the potential to completely knock out Belal Muhammad with one shot. And I talk about this in a lot of my videos, but when there's a power difference like that between two guys, the guy who has significantly less power than his opponent essentially needs to be completely perfect, not get hit at all for a full 3 or 5 rounds. And I don't think Belal Muhammad has a striking ability to do that. So I definitely do think there are a lot of advantages for Kamaru Usman in this hypothetical matchup. But my official prediction for this hypothetical matchup would be a 3rd or 4th round TKO or KO for Kamaru Usman if it's a 5-round fight, or a decision victory for Usman if it's a 3-round fight. But I guess only time will tell what does end up happening, whether or not this fight does get made or not, and even if it does get made, who's going to win and how. But if Kamaru Usman is able to beat Belal Muhammad, he then probably would get another title shot, and how amazing would that story be? After getting knocked out, losing a couple times in a row after being a longtime champion, Kamaru getting another title shot and potentially becoming a UFC champion again, that would just be an amazing story. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think Kamaru Usman can dominate Belal Muhammad, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, check one of these 2 videos popping up now, and until the next time, peace out guys.